Your Highness, if a complete stranger who had no idea who you were or what you were came up to you and said, "What do you do for a living?" what would be your reply?
I would say that my role is I'm the imam, the hereditary imam of a Shia Muslim community, an international Shia Muslim community.
And that your influence in the world is?
I'm responsible for guiding the interpretation of the faith for the Ismaili Muslims and advising them on issues of everyday life that they bring to me or that the imamate as an institution has to decide upon.
May we for a moment go back in time to your boyhood in Kenya. What memories do you have of those days?
Well, I was, of course, very young, and it was during the war. But I remember the beauty of Kenya as a country. I remember Nairobi as being a town rather than a city, with all that represented in terms of the sort of things that amuse a child, the possibility of seeing wildlife over the garden wall and this sort of thing. Some of my early education, which was, to say the least, like a lot of children, painful.
Were you a happy child?
Yes, I think so, although obviously during the war I didn't see my parents a great deal.
Was there any thought ever in your mind at that time that one day you might possibly become the Aga Khan?
Absolutely not.
It didn't even cross your mind for a second. How well did you know your grandfather at that time when you were a boy? He played an important part in your young life.
Yes, he did. He probably had one of the most widespread and inquiring intellects of any person I've ever met. And he was a person who, after an hour with him, you were completely drained of all information that you could give him. He asked an enormous number of questions on an enormous number of subjects. And in that sense, this sort of intellectual stimulus which he provoked and which he was the center of was very, very exciting indeed.
But he also gave advice.
Oh yes, and as the head of the family he was fairly clear that when he gave advice it was to be respected.
What do you think are the qualities that you'll look for when it's your turn to appoint your successor?
I think I would hope that the next imam has a thorough and deep understanding of the faith which he has to represent and lead in its interpretation. I think he must have a good understanding of the issues which the Ismaili community and the countries in which they live will have to be addressed, and that is essentially the countries of Asia and Africa. He will have to have a good understanding of the forces that are at play and that are likely to be at play. And therefore he's going to have to be, I think, well equipped to deal with a leadership office.
The next imam cannot be appointed during your lifetime.
He is appointed during my lifetime in the sense that I'm the person who knows who the next imam would be.
But only
he only me. But he becomes imam when I die.
One of the myths surrounding you is that some people in the West think of you as a living God. Not only is that not true, it is also blasphemous.
Absolutely. I mean, as you know, the faith of Islam was revealed at a time when the Arabian continent was idolatrous. And idolatry, all forms of idolatry, are totally prohibited by Islam. It's certainly true to say that the Western world doesn't necessarily understand the theology of Shiism, nor indeed the theology of many mystical sects, whether they are Shia or Sunni or Christian. Mysticism in its essence is difficult.
Are you a Democrat?
Insofar as a religious institution can be democratic, yes. There are areas where in the interpretation of faith democracy cannot play. But in the choice of leadership, in consultation on decisions, I do seek to consult as widely as possible.
Without going into any specifics, there must be some leaders with whom you have to deal because they have Ismailis under their rule who are either dictators or very undemocratic in their ways. How do you cope with that?
I think there again, because I have a community in those countries, perhaps my perception of the lack of democracy is more acute than it would be in the industrialized world. I think the accusation of dictatorship is, frankly, sometimes too often used in the developing world. I think it's wrong to assume that leaders in the developing world are all greedy, unprincipled, faithless people. I think a lot of them are knowledgeable. They evaluate the risks that they have to deal with. Their evaluations of the risks cannot necessarily be shared by the industrialized world. And I feel myself at times that some of these men and women deserve much greater defense and much greater credit than they get.